Greg's going to show us his redneck Hobart pollen patty mixer. I watched him do this about 20 years ago in Clayton when you came over and showed us, and I never forgot it. It's very simple, so I'm glad you're going to show us how to do this.
And we always debate about whether we actually need to use pollen supplement, whether it's necessary. You know, obviously people in some parts of the country, there's less natural pollen than others. We live in a place with lots and lots of natural pollen, lots of different plants that produce it. Southern Appalachians just have a very rich botany that tends to be, we get lots of pollen. So I've even gone a couple years here not using any. When I was pollinating apples, sometimes if the clusters came through the winter and they were really small clusters, sometimes I was pushing them a little bit by feeding them syrup and giving them pollen supplement. Other years I've hardly used it at all, so I'm kind of inconsistent about it. It's definitely a tool that can be used, doesn't hurt. I think I read somewhere that that a hive actually uses something like 50 to 60 pounds per year of natural pollen that they gather. Is that right?
Well, I actually read one source that said 120 pounds, so
right.
Whatever it is, it's a lot more than people think.
So if you're only feeding them, even if you fed them 4 or 5 or 6 pounds of this in a year, is it really having much of an effect on the hives? I guess you know, it just depends. It probably gives them, if you time it, either in the spring or in the fall, it might give them a little bit of a boost. Some people do it in the fall, thinking that it will give you a little bit bigger winter cluster of bees to just supplement them some in the fall.
I have used it in August when there was a complete pollen dearth, like in a drought year, just to give them a little something to rear a little brood on before coming into the goldenrod flow in September.
Yeah.
And then this year we're going to use a little of it on some very small nukes that are overwintering over double screen boards. They were queen mating nukes, and that we had 3 or 4 yards of queen mating nukes going, and 1 yard we never harvested the queens at the end because we didn't need them and just decided to overwinter. Just little things, you know. And around Christmas time we'll start to give them little chunks of pollen supplement and just a little minor feed coming in if we can get them rearing brood earlier than normal. But except for stuff like that, I just don't find it. Now I got to admit, if I was pollinating for almonds in California, there's a definite need for maybe building those colonies up early. But here in our area, unless you're going to split bees super early, I mean, what's the point, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
But it's still a tool that can definitely be used.
Yeah.
And to do it, the thing we also have to be careful with, of course, is small hive beetles.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you can take out west where it's very dry and there's very few hive beetles, they can pile 3, 4, 5 pounds of pollen sub on a hive all at once in one big glob. I've seen people do that, and here we no way. We at most you'd put 1 pound on a strong hive and half a pound on a weak hive, because and really if you're going to put it on a hive, you want them to consume it in a week to a week to 10 days, because if it lasts in there longer than that, of course the small hive beetles will lay eggs in it, and you'll have a mass of larvae of the small hive beetle.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know what that's like. Well, show us what
sure.
you got going on here.
So yeah, pretty simple recipe. There you go. You could tell me on there.
Okay. All right. What do you want to start with? Sugar?
Where's my other empty bucket? Let me grab that. Oh, it's over there.
10 pounds of sugar.
And the more sugar that pollen patties contain, the more the bees like it. I mean, the whole point of it is you're trying to feed them protein, but ironically, the less protein there is in the patty, the more they eat it. They would rather consume sugar than your attempts to give them protein. So you have to kind of strike a balance. You have to make them sweet enough that they're actually attractive, that the bees want to consume them.
Yeah. 20 pounds of Ultra Bee. We're using Ultra Bee by Man Lake.
And of course you have to figure the economics of it. I mean, there's years where I've said, oh, I'm just going to buy the pre-made patties. But when you do buy the pre-made patties, you're paying for the transport of sugar. And so, you know, you can probably do these patties for less than half the price just by doing it yourself. And you can save some money in the process. There's a daddy long legs in there. Trying to get out of the way. I usually give that a quick mix first. Basically like making cement.
It's just like, that is a cement mixing or a
Yes.
cement mixing tub.
Is that a mortar hoe or is that just a regular hoe?
This is a mortar hoe.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what those two
Got the
holes are.
little
about.
holes in there, yeah.
You can buy this tub at Home Depot.
That didn't take long.
No. So you've got marked down here 22 pounds of syrup. What kind of syrup you got?
This is, it could be high fructose corn syrup, could be sugar syrup that you've bought, could be sugar syrup that you've made. If it's sugar syrup that you've made, it would be essentially a thick 2-to-1 syrup,
Yeah. So
like
this,
you would be feeding in the fall.
Yeah. So this is high fructose corn syrup.
No, this is sucrose sugar syrup.
Okay. It says you want 22 pounds.
All right. And I usually throw in about a cup of vegetable oil. I'm just using canola oil here. Throw that in there. Seems to help a little bit on
Well,
the
that
consistency.
kind of helps keep the patty soft, doesn't it?
Yeah, it helps keep the patty soft. It keeps it from sticking as much as it can. And a little bit of water too. Add about a quart of water, which is about 2 pounds of water. Thin it out just a little bit. Time me.
9 minutes. Okay.
I don't think it takes too long. It seems kind of soupy when you're making it, and then what it'll do is I usually let it sit 6 or 8 hours or overnight, and it sets up. It definitely gets a little bit drier because at first it seems pretty wet. So I think that's why the drywall mixer with a 1/2-inch drill in a bucket also would work, which is how he was doing it. Doesn't that look good enough to eat?
It tastes okay. Yummy. Sweet. Really sweet. Well, your dog would probably like to have a little.
Yeah, Gino's trying to eat it. And it doesn't have to be perfectly mixed. It just needs to be reasonably well mixed. Yeah, he's really interested in it. Then I take just a animal feeding trough like this, pour in a little more oil. What I want to do is kind of coat the sides so that when I'm ready to take it out, it will fall out. And I'll just let that sit up either overnight or 5 or 6 hours. It dries out just a little bit. The Ultra Bee and the sugar will absorb a little bit of the water, so it becomes a little more firm. And then all I have to do is take the whole thing, walk over there to where I have a big flat piece of plywood, flip the whole thing over, and that whole big block falls out like one great big loaf of bread out of here.
And just cut it up with that.
And cut it up with this in pieces. So yep, that's it. I could I could film that with my phone tomorrow or tonight, and then.
Does it actually take as long as 5 or 6 hours? If we went and had some lunch, would it be ready?
We can certainly try.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't I go buy you some lunch?
Let's do it. I like bread making. That just keeps it from sticking to the table badly.
Can I help you?
There you go.
Yeah, I could see a few more hours would have been better, but this will give everybody the idea.
Yeah, a few more hours. It sticks together a little bit better. This is a little crumbly, and it sticks together a little better. But just use wax paper. Just buy those 12 by 12 pieces of wax paper, and then that's about a pound. You could use a scale and measure, but I would usually just take like that, squish it out till it's maybe 3/4 of an inch thick, and throw it in a bucket. Make another one. Yeah.
So how many patties do you get out of this?
This was 54 pounds, so roughly
54
you'd get,
patties.
50 or so, depending on the size of your patties. How's it taste?
Tastes like Ultra Bee and sugar.
And when you buy the pre-made patties, it's very close to the same formula as this. The sugar content, very, very similar to this. Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks for showing us this.
You're welcome.
You want to finish it off, or?
Sure. Take a couple buckets. We can do it.
About 3/4.
3/4 of a pound, so a little bit bigger than that.
Oh,
So after a while, you get pretty good. You can get almost exactly. Yeah, I got to the point where I wasn't even measuring.
Yeah. 1/4 pound one way or another.
Right, exactly. Not worried about it.
Look like a 1 pound burger, Seth?
yeah, just about.
That's good tasting stuff.
It tastes good, I gotta admit. Going?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's start at the beginning here, Greg. What are these things right here?
These were some old hive top feeders that I had that I used to use. They have a little shallow pan in them, so those are old hive top feeders. Now, if I've used, sometimes I use baggy feeding where I do baggies on top of the hive, and they're actually still useful for that. They're nice. I could put a baggie to feed on top of the hive and just flip that over to cover up the baggie.
Okay.
Believe it or not, even with 400 hives, baggie feeding is sometimes it's a useful thing to do. But they're old hive top feeders.
So did the bees have complete access to this?
They had a float in the middle, like a wooden float, and they had access to them.
Yeah, okay.
And then I've since have bought. I started to have trouble with those leaking. The plywood got old and they started leaking, so I went ahead and bought. I have these are the basic Man Lake hive top feeders. They hold 3 gallons. And I have one of those for every hives now.
So this is your preferred?
That's the
method?
preferred feeder. I prefer to feed a lot with that. I feed heavily in the fall. Still use those occasionally for baggies in the spring sometimes as a nice stimulation in the spring to feed them depending on the year. And in the early spring, if the weather's too cold in general, these don't work. They will not come up into this in cold weather and get feed.
So with the baggie, you just take a razor blade slit on the top?
Right. 1 gallon baggie filled with 3/4 of a gallon of syrup. You can't put more than 3/4 of a gallon of syrup or it will leak out. And on top of the hive, and even in the coldest of weather, the bees will come up from underneath it and then actually crawl up on top of the bag.
Yeah.
And the heat of the cluster actually warms up the syrup in the bag.
Yeah.
So I sometimes do that in the spring for that.
See a whole bunch of supers back here.
So I use an all metal queen excluder. They're pretty indestructible. This one's probably 20 plus years old. The bees tend to build this little bit of comb in sort of their way of connecting it and making ladders. And one time somebody taught me a good way to melt. I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll melt these and remove the wax occasionally. And I did that 1 year, and they immediately built it back just like that, comb on the excluder. And then I didn't do that again, and years later, basically that's what they do. They build about that much comb on a queen excluder and stop.
So you don't clean excluders?
No, I haven't cleaned it in years. But
we actually don't either, do we, Seth? Yeah.
Yeah, so they stay about like that.
Yeah.
So I really like excluders. I think if you manage the hive properly and use them properly, they do not inhibit the production of honey. It just depends on how you use them and use them. So because of that, I have about 1,400 supers, and they've very rarely had any brood in them. Maybe there's a few here and there that have had where a queen managed to get to a queen excluder, but a lot of this is all still fairly light comb, though a lot of it's over 20 years old, so it darkens a little bit.
So you don't, it darkens with age, but not with brood.
Not with brood,
So do you make any effort at all?
I don't make any effort. I use no wax moth crystals. I use no fumigant, no anything. For my climate in this area, I can literally put them in here at the end of the summer, and I don't use any kind of treatment, and I don't have any wax moth problems. Other people in other places claim they try to do that and have problems, but I don't know, you may have some insight into that.
Do you have wax foundation or plastic mostly in these?
This is mostly wax, all wax.
So if they damage a little hole, they just fill it
Correct.
back in.
And that's what you'll see occasionally here and there. Every 10th super, you'll see a few little patches where they've chewed the comb. And nothing major, no major webbing or anything. And then the bees easily repair that.
Okay, so your second story on your brood box is medium, but your supers are all shallows?
Seems a bit complicated, doesn't it?
No.
And in the end, it's really not, because, again, I don't allow brood in these, so it doesn't bother me that I have 3 different sizes of boxes. It works out fine.
Okay.
You obviously can't interchange them as much. One thing that you can do, and I can't do, if you have 2 deep boxes, you can draw out deep frames of foundation in the second box.
Yeah.
And if you have 2 boxes and you try to put foundation in the bottom box,
Yeah.
you know what happens.
a
They
little
often
hard.
they don't draw it out as well. So in your situation, you're able to draw out deep frames of foundation in your second box. I can't do that because my second box is a medium. So then I have to think of, if I'm going to draw out deep frames of comb, I have to think about it a little bit. I have to either have just a single box. If it's a single deep box, they'll draw out the foundation fine.
Do you ever reverse them and run the medium?
Or you
on
can
the
reverse
bottom?
them, put the medium on the bottom temporarily, put the deep above it. Then you could draw foundation in that box.
Yeah. So you running 9 frame spacers and all of
9
this?
frame spacers and all the honey supers, right?
And you got a Cowan extractor and Cowan capping spinner
And then these are some comb honey supers. And so what I do, comb honey supers, I usually, I'll have 8 frames in the middle. If I'm going to make cut comb honey, 8 frames in the middle will have foundation. The outside 2 frames will just be regular drawn comb. And then these 8 will be foundation. And the reason for doing that, if you've done comb honey and figured it out, a lot of times they don't draw out these 2 outside frames very well on the comb honey. So if you have just the 8 frames of foundation, they'll draw them out much better and finish them and cap them. So that's a nice trick if you're doing comb honey.
Hopefully it won't be a year or 2 before I see you again.
Let's do some more videos. We'll actually work some bees.
Yeah, that'd be cool. He's suggesting the month by month. I don't know if we can pull that off, but that would make a good series,
Some
month by
version
month.
of that.
Greg Rogers, month by month in Asheville, North Carolina.
I could show you, a medium and a deep versus 2 deeps.
Yeah.
Different
Well, I
ways
used
of
to
doing
run
it.
deep and a shallow, so I'm kind of familiar with it, but a lot of people need to understand that system better. It'd make a good
Right.
video.
I tried the deep and a shallow, and it seemed like with the shallow I got too much drone brood. But
Yeah.
a deep and a medium, it seems like a little bit less
Yeah.
drone brood.
Well, the only reason I went to deep and a shallow so I could get 4 on a semi, 4 pallets on a semi. And,
Right.
and when I not going to California anymore, so I just went back to double deeps.
Right.
Anyway, thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you.
See you
Thank
down
you.
the
Thank
line.
you, Seth. Thank you, Bob.